High Fidelity is a 2000 American romantic comedy drama film directed by Stephen Frears, with an ensemble cast starring John Cusack, Jack Black, Lisa Bonet, Joan Cusack, and more.
John Cusack, Jack Black, Lisa Bonet, Joan Cusack, Eben Yila, and Lily Taylor.
Obviously, I know how special Laura is. I would hate it if I lost her. You know what I'm saying, G?
Get your patchouli stick out of my store! Get it, man!
Think about it, Rob. Okay?
High Fidelity.
I'm looking for a record for my daughter. I just called to say I love you.
Do we look like the kind of store that sells I just called to say I love you? Go to the mall.
What's your problem?
Do you even know your daughter? There's no way she likes that song. Oh, is she in a coma?
Jay, what is your top 5 John Cusack films?
What a timely and appropriate question. My top 5 favorite John Cusack movies are as follows. Being John Malkovich, Bullets Over Broadway, Grosse Point Blank, Midnight Garden of Good and Evil, and High Fidelity.
At one point, I have to say, Mr. J. Manning, welcome to the show, by the way. At one point, this was in my top 5 favorite films of all time. During this time in the 2000s, I had Requiem for a Dream, Fight Club, SLC Punk, The Usual Suspects, and High Fidelity. So not only was this in my top rom-coms or top John Cusack films of all time, but this was, at one point, one of my favorite films of all time. I don't think it's in my top 5 anymore, but Jay, does this hold up to you as just a great film 20 years later?
Yeah. What's cool about it is that the music that they use isn't locked down to any particular time period, so it kind of gives that movie an ageless, timeless feel to it. So it's easier to age a movie like that than something like, say, I don't know, Empire Records that had a little bit more modern music in it. They had some vintage stuff too, but like, yeah, I think it does hold up. It's got great themes. It's got nice characters that are pretty universal, and it's funny. So, yeah, it holds up.
Why are we talking about High Fidelity 20 years later?
Why aren't we talking about this movie? Because it's solid, and I can watch it any time of the day. It's like a great dessert, you know. It's one of my guy romantic comedies that just really resonates, because who hasn't made their top 5 breakup list? I have.
What is different from this film than other films that we talk about here on the Cult of Films is that this feels more of a classic than a cult film. I mean, it still like kind of passes the criteria. Like, it had a $30 million budget. It made only $47 million at the box office. Maybe it's just because I grew up in this time. This hit me right when it should have in my life. I was, I think, junior year of high school, where all these feelings, all the Rob feelings, were deeply entrenched in what I had going on. But it felt like everyone I talked to, even, as far as my peers or even like my sister's friends that were a bit older and all that, feels like everyone saw this movie. So I was a little bit surprised that it didn't make more money at the box office, especially because of the cast and who directed it. Why do you think that this didn't do better in the box office?
Too much stiff competition. X-Men was out, I think, around that time. I don't know. For me, like, the early 2000s had a hard time solidifying classics, I guess we could say, because that was around the time, like 2001, Lord of the Rings came out and just out-epicked everything. And around that, 99, because for me, I have this theory that 1998 was the worst year for movies ever, because I have a hard time thinking of a single good one, and it kind of poisoned the well of the next couple of years. See this in the theater. I didn't see this until like a year later when I was working at Borders, and the DVD came through, and I'm like, oh, a John Cusack movie about vinyl. I worked in a music store. I guess I could like this, and I did.
Yeah, this is for me.
Yeah, I guess that what makes something a cult classic is if it's a successful failure. Things, through the years, if they are good at good films and didn't do well, but then they get word of mouth and people like them over the years, that's what qualifies them as a cult classic, so far as I know. But I think with like romantic comedies, there's such a specific genre that they have a harder time finding an audience, because this isn't an atypical romantic comedy. Sandra Bullock can't find a boyfriend. Oh my God. This is a guy who already has a girlfriend. It's like the opposite. It's going backwards. He had the girlfriend and she dumps him. And it's this entire movie of self-reflection. And he doesn't get it for so long. Poor Rob.
I don't think he gets it at all during the entire movie. It's kind of skipping along where he almost stumbles into a successful ending for himself, which is now watching it a bit frustrating, but we'll get into that. Well, first off, you don't really see a romantic comedy told from the male's perspective, and at least not done in like a sappy way, because yeah, you're right. All of the romantic comedies at the time, it was all these like feel good, riding in the cars with boys type of, fever pitch, where if it didn't have Drew Barrymore in it, it probably wasn't a romantic comedy. And this one is a little bit darker, a little bit dirtier, a little, the veneer. This is like a rom-com that went home after like a 12-hour shift at the coffee shop and all the makeups ran off. It's a little bit more lived in, which is fitting because, it takes place in like a grimy record store. This was kind of the turning point for, rom-coms could be for men as well. And I think, to be fair, every woman I've seen that's seen this film loves this film. It's just universally liked because it just is a lot more honest.
The workplace romantic comedy is kind of rare because it doesn't really take place in that many different places. I mean, Rob's safe zone is his record store. It's his hub. It's his safe place. He makes the trivial lists of top 5 songs about whatever. Those kinds of characters, to me, he's obsessed. Characters who have obsessions like Rob's. He's obsessed about music. He's obsessed about his failed relationships. He's obsessed about what he can get from these relationships. That's his foible, and that's what he tries to overcome throughout the film. That's what I love about it. So
this was an adaptation of a Nick Hornby novel, which I think that he personally shares a lot of characteristics with Rob. He's kind of known in the music industry as like a musical elitist, to his detriment. Like a lot of critics are not very favorable to Nick Hornby. He famously like slams like bands like Radiohead and Kid A, but he's more of a rock and roll traditionalist. He likes the Springsteens and all that. He worked a lot with Ben Folds, actually writing some of his songs for him. And then again, Stephen Frears, 2-time Academy nominated for Best Director for Queen and Dangerous Liaison. He directed The Grifters, Mary Riley. So this was, he worked with the best in the business, Judi Dench's and Daniel Day-Lewis, a young Daniel Day-Lewis. So this was kind of a departure from his normal fare. What do you think about this particular story spoke to him as a filmmaker?
I don't know if I could speak for him. If I were directing it, it's definitely the humanity of it. If we can assign that to a romantic comedy, I think that's a good thing because Rob is deeply flawed. And if there's any appealing thing to a director, it's that you can take a main character like that and make him relatable. You've got a real challenge there because Rob is this asshole, and everyone tells him that throughout the entire movie. I mean, what's her name? His own sister, technically his own sister storms.
Yeah.
Hey, Liz.
Hey, Rob, you fucking asshole!
Leaves, and he's completely nonplussed by it, which is, I love that. He's like, yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
I am. And so if there's appeal to it from a filmmaking standpoint, it's Rob's humanity, because you're trying to dig through these obsessions of his to get the savior, the virtue that he has, which is when he does give everything into a relationship, he's actually a really cool guy to be around.
Sure.
He doesn't understand that. That's why he's making lists of human beings. My number 5, Allison Ashmore, she was 14 years old, and she was giving me makeout sessions, and then she was giving this other guy makeout sessions. So she sucks. I'm the victim. Like, no, Rob, no. No.
Yeah, I think that Rob is like a perfect encapsulation of a creative person, but like you said, an obsessive person that just, he views himself as a romantic. He's completely unaware, of his own stink. And I like the unconventional narrating system. I despise movies with overfed exposition, but that's what this film is. Like, he's an unreliable narrator, but we get to see it unedited. Basically, we get to see him talk to the camera and be like, oh, I tried, I was just trying to touch this girl's boob and she wouldn't let me, like, I am the victim. And then when he meets up with her all these years later, and she's just like, listen, you a-hole, like, I would have slept with you, but I was 16 years old, and then I was forced into a shitty relationship because of how that affected me, because you dumped me. And then she walks away, she storms off, and he's just like, oh, I did break up with her, like, that's the point, I'm great. It's this, you have this weird unreliable narration, but you get to see the truth of it, which is different from other films like that when you're following around the POV character. But this one, he's literally talking into the camera, and like I said, on paper I should hate this film, but it actually works like perfectly within the context of itself.
The breaking the fourth wall, which I'm never a fan of unless you're Deadpool, works like gangbusters.
Sure.
In this, because you're right, unreliable narrator. He's an unreliable boyfriend. He's kind of an unreliable friend and boss too.
Yeah.
And what I love, and I love character contrast too, because within his store, his record store, you have ultimate alpha in the way of Jack Black, and you have ultimate beta in the way of Dick, and he's stuck in the middle between these two, and he again feels like a victim in there too. Like, I can't fire them. They showed up every day for 4 years. The only real men in his life, those are his male role models. He has no one else, because Rob is surrounded by women who are disappointed in him.
Right.
Even his own mother. And she calls him up like, you don't do this right, you don't do that. Shut up, Mom.
Yeah. The best
Really
quote in the whole movie. Shut up, Mom.
That's some cold shit. And he never listens to the women in his life. And it's wonderful to see it picked apart. And then when he finally does understand that, oh, you mean all I have to do is listen and not wait to talk? Like when he asks his girlfriend to marry him at the end, and she's like, no freaking way. Because that's a storybook ending that you want, but no, you're not going to get it. Sorry, Rob, you got to work for it. Rob's a great multi-dimensional character.
He is, but then, like, again, he's like the banner for that specific time. Like, especially when I saw this movie as a kid, I'm just like, man, that is my spirit animal, right? Like, this is who I am. This movie gets me so much, and now I'm like, oh god, he's borderline an incel. Like, it's kind of. It's kind of gross, like the way that he just thinks about, women. It just, again, like not even just women, but just like a professional, like where his life is, because he just keeps making the lowest effort decision, but expecting grandeur throughout the entire thing. That's
a perfect way to put it. He puts in minimal basic effort, and yeah, I mean, he admits that Catherine Zeta-Jones is out of his depth, because she is out of everyone's depth. I mean, not that I was ever obsessed over her and never made her picture my computer background ever. But he said I feel like a loser. I feel like a poser. And then when she sees through that and dumps him for the perfect piece of human evolution that is Marco,
sure,
he just falls to pieces. Like, what do you mean? I was faking it the whole time. Wasn't that great?
But little did he know that that's what she would kind of, grow up to be as well. Like, she's just this horribly vapid person that just spews, random bullshit. That's such a great scene, though. Like when they're walking up the stairs and he's basically telling the audience how much of a imposter syndrome he's suffering from just from being with her. And then she puts on a shirt and she turns around and it's literally the Pretenders. I'm like, that's the best, like, wink at the audience moment.
Great visual motif and great music reference. I mean, you need a director or a writer or both with a skilled eye to have something like that, because if she turned around and was in like a slippery when wet t-shirt, the message might have been lost. But the Pretenders was the perfect choice.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I love, like, when he's sleeping with Lily Taylor and she's all depressed and stuff, and it goes back to like what he can, like, what can I get on? I need the emotional stability that you need to give me, but she's so damaged that he can't get it, and they can't fulfill each other's emotional needs. So when she's like, I met someone else, bye. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Can't we be? I'm damaged just like you. Isn't that great?
The film has a very defined 3 acts. I feel like it starts out with like the setup of the introduction. We get all the characters fleshed out. You know, Laura and Rob's breakup. That's where it kind of takes you. And then the second act is kind of where I guess the fun kind of begins, because that's the top 5 tour, and then it kind of culminates in the mending of Rob and Laura's relationship. I think that middle act is just so much fun, because I don't know, I'm a list person. I love the whole journey, or just the idea of going through the old phone book.
Yeah, I mean, now you just look on Facebook, but he had to. You want to see what your exes have turned out, you know, just go on social media. But I love that the mystery of like, okay, well, I'll call Charlie, and like, she's in the phone book. Are you kidding? Normal people. She's not normal people. She's like this goddess or whatever. But
she should be on Mars. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. She's a full of shit a-hole herself. And like, who's the fourth? I love when he realizes that Laura has made the list. He has his big breakdown. Like, Jackie Olden had no bearing effect on my life whatsoever. It was a casual thing, so I'm glad it was done.
He's even lying to himself, right?
Oh man, that scene where he's like picturing the sex with Ian is because we've all been there.
Yes.
Like, ladies, if you don't know this, we have all been there.
Mm-hmm.
Us dudes, because we know what that is like. No one is having better sex than the sex you're having with Ian inside my head. Right. And it drives him bonkers. It's such a great scene. You are Ian's plaything. Like, oh shit.
Turns into a Red Shoe Diary episode.
Yeah. He's throwing shit. He's stomping around like a baby. It's like, yeah, dude, I know. Well, maybe if you weren't such a dick, it wouldn't be happening.
Yeah, again, man, just the quote. This movie is so quotable. Like, that was another one that I wrote down and set a sign as, she's in the fucking phone book, or what fucking Ian guy.
Oh, brilliant. I love it because that's comedy torture. Like, he's talking to Lisa Bonet, who's like super hot and talented, and like the last thing he wants to do right now is talk to her. He's like, just excuse me for a minute. Goes into a room, goes into another room, shuts the door. What fucking Ian guy? I love that it's Tim Robbins.
Oh my god. He plays such a gross, like, sleazy patchouli. Like, you could smell the patchouli through the screen.
Oh man, you know he has a life coach and just...
Or I guess it was almost like a Rashomon scene where he walks into the record store and then he's playing the different scenarios in his head, and he's just like, okay, well, I think we're done here, and then, you know, it goes from like John Cusack screaming in his face, or his friends, like even Dick, like, takes the air conditioning off the wall and kills him, like
like teeth come out. He's like, get him, man, get him. Kind of.
Dick of all people gets the coup de grace. But yeah, let's talk about the cast real quick, because I feel like this was, you know, in 2000, this was John Cusack would go on to have a couple other, you know, larger roles after this, but he was white hot during the Grosse Pointe Blank and High Fidelity duo, right? Like, this was peak John Cusack. In comparison, I think this was almost like a passing of the torch to Jack Black, because Jack Black had a couple real small minor roles after this, but this was his, like, he took this role, this tiny role, chew up the scenery. This was his, like, John Belushi Animal House breakout role, and he just propelled his career from here.
Without a doubt. Like, the only thing I had ever seen Jack Black in, and I didn't know it was Jack Black at the time, was in Dead Man Walking.
Mm-hmm.
And he was Sean Penn's brother, and he was just some regular, like, redneck guy. But when he makes this is one of the best entrances for a character, when Barry just kicks open the door, and he's like, what is this sad bastard music you're playing?
Right.
And I'm like, oh my god, it's like every guy I work with at Borders. He's gonna fight over the music. We're gonna have to listen to, you know, old Sex Pistols tapes or something, and he's that musical alpha, like, my taste is awesome, your taste can kiss my ass.
Right.
But then you find out he's actually very talented and has earned his arrogance in a way. You know, like the scene where he's tearing apart that guy just called to say I love you. Is your daughter in a coma? She doesn't like that song.
Do you know your child? Yeah.
You know, it's a little clerksy, but I think actually Jack Black handles it in a much more sophisticated way than in something like, you know, Randall and Clerks or something, which is funny on its own. But I just love how he's like, you know, the guy wants to buy the record in a minute, you know, and he's piling records on the guy. He's like, you don't own this Bob Dylan record? What's wrong with you? Yeah. Like that kind of stuff. Jack Black, he's got this just great insane energy. There's no off on his switch. I got a buddy of mine who's just like him. He's a musician. He's got the whole, wily-eyed, 10 cups of coffee in the morning kind of look to him. I know people like this, and he owns that character. And I love his contrast with Dick, who's just like the little mousy guy.
Right. But they're all equal elitists. Like they all feel like they're completely superior. Even the timid Dick, where the girl comes up and she's like, I want the new Green Day album. He's like, well, do you know that, Green Day was, inspired by the Crooked Little Fingers or something like this? And just like is there to just try to, ooze his knowledge of music and like open her mind, and almost like a fishing, casting his bait out for this lady. So all of them, so different, and that's what makes it so delicious. Their interactions, even, and they're all like into the same shit, right? There's that one great scene where they're talking about one of the bands or whatever. I think it was like Laura's dad's like great send off or something when he dies for the funeral, and then like Dick says something, and Jack Black's like, "No, you fucking idiot," and he's like, "No, he is right." He's like, "Yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter." Like,
it was Dan, you fucking idiot. No, it was Jan. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can I tell you though? When I worked at Borders and I discovered this movie, I did the Beta Band trick, and it works.
Oh no!
I actually played the 3 EPs by the Beta Band, and someone bought it.
That's so awesome.
So
it was an ensemble cast, so everyone kind of got their chance to shine. But we did get some like real small roles, like the opening scene, the young Rob making out with Alison Ashmore is actually Drake Bell from Nickelodeon's Drake and Josh fame, which is kind of cool. And Bruce Springsteen his little as Rob's spirit animal is a great little cameo.
There's a deleted scene with Beverly D'Angelo that didn't make it into the movie, where she's selling Rob the record collection of her ex-husband who left her for a 19-year-old friend of her daughter's. It's a really funny scene where he's like, "Oh my God, you have everything in here." She's like, "Give me $50 to take it." He's like, "I can't do that to a fellow collector." And she tells him what her husband did, and he's like, "Yeah, I still can't." he's got some class. He's got some morals.
Yeah,
but that didn't make it into the movie.
I think that, like you said, as far as the music goes, I think Howard Shore's original score is a perfect complement to the soundtrack, because I mean, a film like this, the movie is about the soundtrack. He's responsible for the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, so he is no slouch, and it's not like overtly in your face, but it just is a nice backbone and complement. It knows when to kind of go to the forefront and kind of chase back a little bit and let the soundtrack kind of do the talking.
It's a really good soundtrack. Movies like Empire Records, where they let the music take over and they have a montage. There's not really a montage scene in this that puts a song straight forward. They play a song, all through the movie or somewhere or sometime. But I love that Rob's choice in music is representative of his emotional state. Like he's having a melancholy moment, so he summons the spirit of Bruce Springsteen. He, he's feeling, somewhat artistic and ambivalent to the world, and he plays the Beta Band. I mean, I love that album, and it's full of that melancholic stuff. And then Let's Get It On. It's like that's the song of our whole relationship.
Yeah.
So when you have music that connects with the characters instead of just songs in a movie, it works a lot better, I think.
It goes to say something about someone that is such a self-proclaimed, or not even self-proclaimed, but just like a professor of something that's not technically, he didn't go to school for music appreciation or anything, but he is just so. He just knows, and that's why like people like Barry and Dick kind of flock to him, because there are these. It's like I used to be with Magic the Gathering cards, where I would sit there and tear apart my entire collection. All my cards would be on the floor, and kind of put them back into a certain order. Like the great scene where Dick comes over, he's just like, "Oh, I was going to invite you to something, but it looks like you're redoing your records. What are you doing?" He's like, "Autobiographical." He's like, "No fucking way."
And I've never done that with my movie collection at all. The record collection is just a great external representation of how Rob thinks. He categorizes, he compartmentalizes, he wants things his way. I mean, would he ever let Laura organize the record collection? No, he's too much of a control freak. But I'm sure after they reconcile and they're back together and they're good, he's willing to give. And to me, that's what the whole Rob arc is about. He needs to be able to learn to give and not expect anything in return. Like, he's making that tape for the girl in the magazine who's interviewing him, but he's making it so he can get something back from her. Whether he's gonna, I don't know if he's gonna sleep with her or what else, but he wants at least the admiration. But when he's making the tape for Laura at the end, he's making it full of songs that she would like, not what he feels that he likes that she should like.
Right.
It's finally something selfless, and he gets it finally. And that song that plays at the end is truly fitting. It's a great conclusion to that Rob can finally, after 2 hours of frustrating the shit out of your audience, be selfless.
And it's minuscule, but it's huge in the scope of his character. It's that huge breakthrough. Finally, it's like, oh, I could finally think about with the lens of someone else. Which is, again, like I said, it's like, oh, you put on your shoes today, but for him, that it's huge. It's everything. And that was the big aha moment. I like how it kind of is ambiguous, because like I said at the beginning of this, he stumbles into a good ending for himself. Like, he again puts out low effort, but he still winds up with the girl, so you don't really know if it's gonna work out, like, because maybe he's just quickly as that just back on his own shit, and we don't know, and they don't wind up working out in the end. But it does kind of leave you with a little bit of a promising ending with their relationship.
There's baby steps through the whole thing. Like, when he puts out the record for those skaters who steal from him. Yeah. I think there's a two-pronged approach to that. He's doing it to get them to stop stealing from him. And he's doing it because, you can only be a critic for so long. They say those who can't do criticize. And there's a part of him that wants to stop being a critic, wants to put something real out there, so he gives to these kids, and in a sense that helps him. Like, oh, if I can make these two little skater delinquents help give them something good, maybe I can do it for my relationships too. And it turns out you can. I love that they have the party for him. They're still stealing records from him. Because like Jack Black's up there singing, it pans over all the audience listening to Jack Black, and you see the two skater kids still stealing all his shit.
I always like to kind of round the episode out with asking either myself or whoever I'm talking to what the legacy of this film, but we kind of get to see what it is. I think the legacy is that it influenced a lot of the future rom-coms, and it showed that you could get a little bit more profane and a little bit more real with your rom-coms, and people still kind of show up, even though that this didn't make $100 million. I still think it laid a blueprint down to kind of shake up that specific genre. I think the final form of this film is basically Scott Pilgrim. It kind of feels like the same movie a little bit, of course more stylized, but it's just like, this character of Scott Pilgrim and Rob are very similar. And this film also just got a Hulu series release where it kind of gender swaps Rob, though it's the same character name. You have like Dick and Barry. They went a little bit more diverse with the characters, which is good. I know you've seen at least a little bit of it, so I want to get your thoughts on it. But at least for the movie standpoint, it's just like, oh, it's three white dudes in a record store. That was kind of perfect casting, like across the board.
I always said there should be an Oscar for best casting. I mean, maybe High Fidelity qualifies for it, maybe it doesn't. But when you have the right crop of actors, and what very, very little I saw of the Hulu series, I'm sure it's very good. It's not really for me. But I love that the irony of Zoe Kravitz being in it, who's the daughter of Lisa Bonet, who was in High Fidelity. So maybe it is a passing of a generational torch there.
Right. A little bit more depth to the Rob character. But again, I think that's almost like, and this is kind of controversial to say, but I think that's missing the point. Like, you get all the fact is that he's kind of a poser and that's what kind of the point is, that he's very good at, he's a scholar in what he knows, but he's kind of in his own stink, and that's the whole point of the movie, which makes it so endearing how flawed of a character he is. So
there is some self-awareness to Rob. He knows he works in fetish properties. He says it when he opens his store early in the movie, that a fetish property, not unlike porn. I get off on the, or I get by on the guys who make a special effort to shop here, mostly young men. So he's among his ilk. And even in like the year 2000, vinyl was kind of finding its way out the door mainstream.
Right.
I think the last vinyl album I bought just for for novelty's sake was in the year 2000. I think it was a Fish album. But in today's world, music is mobile as a service now, so Rob would definitely be out of business.
Yeah. Well, one of the most dated lines of the entire film was, "Oh, maybe I should just close up shop and go work for a Tower Records." It's like, ugh.
No.
Or a Virgin Megastore or whatever. Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, that there's not too much to say more about High Fidelity. It's just a perfect film as far as in a specific time to watch it. When I saw this film, like I said, this was just what I was going through. Who would you recommend this film for now, 20 years later?
I would recommend it to anybody, especially a guy who has just broken up with someone. And this is a perfect example of what not to do until the last 5 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's perfectly stated. It's a great breakup film.
Yeah, it has solidified itself as one of the great divorce movies and reconcilement movies. It's got everything. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all for coming to our record store and talking High Fidelity with us. I want to thank my special guest, a returning guest, once again, Mr. Jay Manning from Classic Flicks. Look into that camera and tell everyone what you're up to and where to find you.
Classic Flicks has released a new video for the Watchmen series, which I very much enjoyed, and you can find that on my channel. I am in the next couple hours going to finish a discussion video of Star Trek Generations. And if you hop over to Trexpertise, the channel I contribute to, we just released a video early wee hours this morning based on an essay of mine called Terrorism in Star Trek Part 2. So check out Part 1 and 2 of that on Trexpertise.
That is excellent. And let me just say that Watchmen video is fucking aces. I loved it so much. So great. Go check it out on the YouTubes. If you want to follow me, I'm at Jon the Host. If you want to follow this very show, you could do so at The Cult of Films, all undercase. We'll be uploading this to all your favorite podcasting sites as well. So all your Spotify's, your iTunes, all that stuff. Leave us, 4 vinyls or whatever you want to leave us, and that would be just great. Until next time, I have no big outro for High Fidelity.
Let's get it on.
See you next time.